Before dawn, in northern France, something on the far side of the line seemed to be forming in the mist. From a distance, it had all the ordinary signs of an army settling into place. There were trucks where trucks should be. There were tanks where tanks should be. There were men moving through hedgerows and bivouac areas with the casual boredom of soldiers who had been told to wait. Radio traffic flickered in the dark. Engines coughed and growled beyond the tree line. Somewhere in the low ground, a column seemed to be shifting into position, and if you were listening from the wrong farmhouse or watching from the wrong hill, the message was simple enough. The Americans had brought armor. A German report could move faster than a tank. It could pass through a field telephone, climb into an intelligence summary, cross a headquarters table, and become a decision. A few scattered observations might harden into a map symbol. A map symbol might become a threat. A threat might hold men in place when they should have moved, or pull them toward a road where nothing was waiting except mud, canvas, and air. That was the unsettling part. In war, an army does not always need to exist in the way civilians imagine existence. It does not always need steel, fuel, and thousands of bodies in every place it appears. Sometimes, it needs only enough signs to make the enemy behave as if it is real. And in the months around D-Day, the Allies became experts at making the enemy believe it was seeing more than was really there. The strange force in this story did not operate like an ordinary combat unit. It carried weapons, but its sharpest tools were misdirection, sound, paint, radio procedure, and performance. Its soldiers could be artists, engineers, radio operators, actors, drivers, clerks, painters, and sound men, all moving through Europe with a mission that sounded almost impossible when stripped of military language. Their job was to make German observers believe they had found real American strength in the wrong place. A tank might be a rubber shell held up by air. A convoy might be arranged so it would be noticed. A radio net might belong to no real division at all. A patch on a shoulder might be worn so that someone would notice it. A careless conversation in a cafe might be careless only in the way a deliberate whisper is careless. German intelligence was meant to notice just enough, and the men creating the illusion had to make sure it never looked like an illusion.
This is Tom Mackenzie, and you are listening to Unexplained History. Tonight, we are looking at one of the strangest military units of World War II, the Ghost Army, officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. They did not command the entire D-Day deception effort, and they did not win the war by themselves. But they did something that still feels almost unreal. They built pieces of an army out of noise, rubber, radio traffic, and human nerve, then let the enemy complete the picture in its own imagination. And here is the question that keeps pulling me back. If a fake army changes where real soldiers go, how fake was it?
The Ghost Army was not folklore. It was not an urban legend invented after the war by men who wanted their service to sound stranger than it was. Officially, it was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a U.S. Army tactical deception unit of about 1,100 men. It was activated on January 20th, 1944, and arrived in Europe in May, just before the invasion everyone now knows as D-Day. But the unit's wartime existence lived in a shadowy space. Men were told not to talk. Records remained classified. Families heard partial stories or nothing at all. The public version of World War II, filled with beaches, bombers, generals, codebreakers, and industrial might, while the smaller story stayed locked behind official silence for more than 50 years. When the files were declassified in 1996, the outline seemed almost too theatrical to be real. Inflatable tanks, sound trucks, fake radio transmissions, scripts, pretense. A mobile deception package moving across Europe, pretending to be larger formations, carrying out more than 20 battlefield deceptions, with the Ghost Army Legacy Project listing 25. The first mystery is obvious. How could anyone believe it? The deeper mystery is more uncomfortable. How much of war depends on what people think they are seeing, even before the rubber tanks arrive? Now here is the remarkable thing. This story was not published in Colorado. Not in Richmond, though that is the dateline. The story broke in Paris, France, on June 17, 1864, in a newspaper called Le Pays. Translated into German, reprinted in London. Excerpted in American papers from New York to San Francisco. Within weeks, the Colorado Martian had crossed the Atlantic in both directions. And what happened next, what this story reveals about who believed it and why, is stranger than the discovery it described.
This is Tom Mackenzie, and you are listening to Unexplained History. Tonight, we are going back to 1864, to a story that started in a French newspaper and spread across 2 continents before anyone stopped to ask a very simple question. Was any of it real? The answer takes us through petrified men, Mark Twain's best joke, the house of Jules Verne, and a science writer who built a machine that is still running 160 years later.
The temptation is to picture the Ghost Army as a prank that somehow slipped into official history. A few clever men inflate a tank, fool a distant observer, and grin at the absurdity of it. But that version is too simple, and it makes the wartime problem look smaller than it was. By 1944, Europe was not just a battlefield. It was a place where every scrap of information could change what commanders believed was coming next. Every army was trying to read the other through fragments. Aerial photographs, radio intercepts, prisoner interrogations, resistance reports, agent messages, road traffic, supply dumps, shoulder patches, rumors overheard in towns, the pattern of silence on a radio frequency, the sudden appearance of a unit insignia in a place where it did not belong. No single fragment was enough. Together, fragments could become a picture. And if the picture was convincing, commanders might treat it as real. This was the world into which the Ghost Army stepped. The Allies were already running a much larger deception ecosystem around D-Day, including the strategic plans remembered under names like Operation Fortitude. That broader network tried to make German leaders uncertain about where and when the main invasion would come. It used double agents, false formations, controlled leaks, and a carefully cultivated sense that the Normandy landings might not be the whole blow. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops should not be confused with that entire system. They were not the whole deception war. They were a tactical unit, built to create battlefield illusions closer to the front. But their work belonged to the same psychological universe. They understood that enemy intelligence did not receive truth directly. It worked from indicators, and indicators could be arranged. A road full of vehicles told one story. A radio net told another. A cluster of tents told another. The sound of armor at night told another. The right details, layered together, could make a small force seem large, or make an empty place seem dangerous. The unit itself had been assembled with an unusual mixture of talents. Many accounts describe artists, illustrators, designers, radio specialists, and engineers serving alongside more conventional soldiers. The war needed men who could fight, but this particular mission also needed men who understood surfaces, symbols, habits, and attention. A painter notices what a silhouette says from a distance. A radio operator knows how a real unit sounds over the air. A deception-minded officer understands that a false impression is strongest when the enemy thinks it found the answer on its own. Their official enemy was the German army. The work was aimed at the judgments German officers made from what they saw and heard. The British had already shown that deception could work on a grand scale. Operation Bartram, before the Battle of El Alamein, had used camouflage, dummy equipment, and misdirection to help conceal preparations and confuse Axis expectations. American planners studied those lessons. If tanks could be hidden, perhaps tanks could also be invented. If movement could be disguised, perhaps absence could be dressed up as presence. There is something eerie about that step. Camouflage usually means making a real thing vanish. The Ghost Army's work often meant making an unreal thing appear. It was camouflage working in reverse. The men trained at places like Camp Forest, Tennessee, in a country still far from the European front. In training, the tools could look almost comic. A rubber tank has none of the moral weight of a real one when it is lying folded on the ground. It can be lifted, dragged, packed away, and repaired like a training prop. But distance changes objects. So does fear. So does the knowledge that the other side is trying to kill you. From the air, an inflated tank did not need to survive close inspection. It needed to hold its shape long enough to be photographed, glimpsed, or reported. From across a river, a fake vehicle park did not need to drive. It needed to make a watcher ask whether a division had arrived. On the radio, a phantom headquarters did not need a mess hall, a motor pool, or a full roster of living men. It needed call signs, traffic patterns, discipline, and the small imperfections that make communication sound human. A perfect illusion is suspicious. A slightly messy illusion can feel real. That may be why the behavioral side mattered so much. Some Ghost Army accounts describe men wearing the patches of units they were impersonating. They would drive visible routes. They would let themselves be seen. They might speak loudly enough in a public place for the wrong ears to catch the right scraps. The point was not merely to hide the trick. The point was to create confirmation that seemed accidental. That kind of accidental confirmation is powerful because it feels stolen. If an enemy believes he has overheard a secret, he may trust it more than a message delivered openly. If he thinks he has spotted a careless patch, he may treat that sighting as confirmation. The Ghost Army worked inside that weakness. It did not simply tell a lie. It built circumstances in which the enemy could discover the lie for himself. And once he discovered it, the lie belonged to him. Each week, readers returned to learn more about the inhabitant of the planet Mars. By the time the serial concluded, the Colorado Martian had been reprinted in newspapers across Germany, excerpted in British periodicals, and summarized in American papers from the New York Tribune to the Daily Alta California. Readers on both sides of the Atlantic were following the story as news. Not a novel. Not a satire. News. And then, in January 1865, the serial concluded. It got a hardback. And the world moved on.
6 months in a newspaper. A hardback. Reprints across Germany and Britain and America. And nobody stood up and said, "Wait a minute." To understand why, you have to understand what the 1860s were like for anyone who opened a newspaper.
The most famous images of the Ghost Army are the inflatable tanks. They are irresistible because they make war look briefly ridiculous. A handful of men standing beside a tank that can be lifted by its corners. A weapon of modern industrial violence reduced to rubber skin and air. A battlefield icon turned into something that belongs in a warehouse or a carnival. But the joke fades when you think about how the object was meant to be seen. A tank on a battlefield is rarely studied the way a museum visitor studies a machine. It is glimpsed through smoke, branches, bad weather, or binocular lenses. It appears in aerial photographs. It is counted by anxious observers who may be exhausted, scared, and far away. The silhouette matters. The shadow matters. The placement matters. The story around it matters even more. An inflatable tank standing alone in an empty field might look foolish. An inflatable tank among tire tracks, tents, fuel cans, radio traffic, and distant engine noise becomes one piece of a larger sentence. Put together, those details tell an observer that armor has arrived. The visual deception crews understood that the object was only part of what an observer believed. The setting taught the viewer what the object meant. A dummy tank needed the right posture in the landscape. Fake artillery needed plausible placement. A vehicle park needed order, but not too much order. Men had to move through the area as though they were trying to do ordinary military work. The deception could not feel like a display. It had to feel like a unit trying not to be noticed and failing in exactly the way real units fail. At this point, the Ghost Army becomes less like a magic trick and more like a strange branch of military psychology. The point was not simply to make a person look at the wrong thing. It was to guide enemy attention across miles of contested territory. The observers might include German reconnaissance aircraft, forward patrols, spies, signal analysts, and headquarters officers who never saw the field at all. For those headquarters officers, the illusion might arrive as a few cautious sentences on paper, possible armored concentration, unconfirmed movement east of town, radio traffic suggesting the arrival of a division headquarters. A report like that carries uncertainty, but war does not wait for perfect certainty. Commanders must decide under pressure. They must reserve forces, shift guns, watch roads, or hold positions. If the deception can add enough doubt, it has already done work. The Ghost Army did not need every German officer to be fooled completely. It needed German systems to hesitate, misread, or prepare for the wrong possibility. Sometimes doubt is as useful as belief. Source-wise, this is important. Public history accounts and veteran recollections make the unit vivid, and they are essential to understanding its human texture. Official and institutional summaries provide the safer skeleton. The unit existed. It was a U.S. Army tactical deception unit. It used visual, sonic, radio, and behavioral methods, and it performed many battlefield deceptions in Europe. Specific scenes, especially when retold decades later, need careful handling. A famous anecdote can capture the spirit of the work without proving every detail of a particular German reaction. That caution does not weaken the story. It makes the mechanism more interesting. The Ghost Army's strongest claim is not that one rubber tank fooled one named officer at one perfectly documented hour. The stronger claim is that modern armies were vulnerable to manufactured patterns. A rubber tank became powerful when joined to other signals. A sound recording became powerful when heard where radio traffic suggested armor. A shoulder patch became powerful when it appeared in a town already whispering about troop movement. The unit created clusters of indicators. One odd detail asks to be checked. A pattern invites belief. Think of the work table behind that cluster. Someone has to decide which road a fake convoy should seem to have used, then make the ground tell the same story. Someone has to know whether a tank silhouette belongs near a hedgerow or farther back, where distance will forgive its seams. Someone has to ask what a German observer expects to find if an armored unit has truly arrived. Fuel points, maintenance areas, mess traffic, a little disorder. Men who look too busy to be posing. The illusion is not one object. It is a cluster of details that have to feel ordinary together. The men who built those clusters had to think like both artists and intelligence officers. They needed to know what mattered at a glance. They needed to know how much was too much. A real army leaves signs because it cannot help leaving signs. A fake army must leave signs deliberately, and that makes restraint part of the craft. Too few signs and nothing happens. Too many, and the scene begins to advertise itself. Imagine setting up a dummy position in the field. The rubber armor has to be inflated. The trucks have to be placed. The tracks have to make sense. The tents cannot look like a display. Men have to move through it without seeming to pose for anyone. Somewhere nearby, radio operators need to tell the same lie in a different language. Not German and not English exactly, but the procedural language of military traffic. Then the sound trucks begin their part, and the empty field begins to sound occupied. A series of articles claiming that the astronomer Sir John Herschel had built a powerful telescope and observed bat-winged humanoids, unicorns, lush vegetation, entire civilizations on the lunar surface. The story was eventually exposed. But the images it planted of other worlds teeming with life, of cosmic neighbors just across the void, persisted in the culture for decades. The articles were still being translated and reprinted in Europe 30 years later. In 1853, the philosopher William Whewell published Of the Plurality of Worlds, a serious treatise that debated whether other planets were inhabited. Whewell himself was skeptical, but the book ignited a global conversation. If other worlds existed, and if they were like Earth, then surely they must be populated. Spin-off books proliferated. Descriptions of Martian civilizations, Venusian cultures, and lunar societies appeared alongside genuine astronomical discoveries. By 1864, the reading public had been marinating in extraterrestrial speculation for 3 decades. The moon affair had softened the ground. Whewell's debate had made the question respectable. Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth had just come out the same year. Scientific adventure was the dominant literary mode. The Colorado Martian did not emerge from a vacuum. It emerged from a culture that was hungry for cosmic neighbors, hungry for remarkable discoveries. And here is the key: a culture in which journalism, science writing, and serialized fiction all shared the same page.
So now we have the picture. A French newspaper runs a serial for 6 months about a Martian mummy in a Colorado meteorite. The story crosses the Atlantic twice. It gets a hardback. And the culture it lands in is already full of petrified giants, lunar batmen, and serious debates about civilizations on other planets. Which brings us to a problem. If you look closely at this story, certain things do not add up.
The sonic deception may be the most haunting part of the Ghost Army story, because it turns absence into atmosphere. A fake tank can be photographed. A fake patch can be seen. A fake radio neck can be logged. But sound moves through the body differently. It arrives at night. It leaks through trees. It seems to come from somewhere just beyond proof. A distant engine does not ask you to inspect it. It asks your imagination to finish the picture. The Ghost Army used sound trucks with recordings designed to suggest the movement and presence of large military formations. Public accounts often connect this work to specialists and laboratory support associated with advanced sound recording. The practical idea was simple enough to state and difficult to execute. Play the right sounds from the right places at the right volumes so that enemy listeners believed a much larger force was nearby. What does an armored unit sound like when it is not yet visible? It sounds like engines warming. It sounds like tracks clanking. It sounds like trucks grinding along roads. It sounds like men, equipment, metal, and mass. It sounds expensive. It sounds dangerous. Most of all, it sounds like something that cannot be ignored. The recordings had to be chosen and projected with care. Sound does not behave like a flat image. Weather changes it. Terrain changes it. Night changes it. A valley may carry it. Wind may bend it. Too loud and the illusion becomes crude. Too soft and it disappears into the ordinary noise of war. The operators needed to create not a concert, but a credible disturbance. The Germans did not need to hear a full symphony of machinery. They needed to hear enough to imagine the rest. In a quiet sector, even a partial sound could carry authority. A low mechanical rumble might make a sentry picture vehicles moving nose to tail along a road he could not see. A burst of clanking metal might become, in his mind, a column settling into a forward area. By morning, if the sound matched other scraps of information, the night's uncertainty could harden into something that looked like a reportable fact.
Okay, stay with that for a second. A rubber tank is one kind of deception because you can laugh at it when you are standing beside it. But a sound in the dark is different. If you are on the enemy side and you hear armor moving where your map says armor might be, you do not get to walk over and tap the tank. You have to report what you think is happening. That is where this story stops feeling like a stunt and starts feeling like psychological warfare.
Sound also gave the Ghost Army a way to fill space. A small group of men could not physically occupy the footprint of a full division, but noise could stretch them. Radio could stretch them. A few visual displays could anchor the illusion, while sound made it seem alive. That layered method matters because each channel covered the weakness of the others. The rubber tank could not move like a real tank, but distant sound could imply movement. The sound could not be photographed, but the dummy vehicles could provide a visual explanation. Radio traffic could suggest headquarters activity, while the behavior of real soldiers made the presence feel socially confirmed. It was not one trick. It was a system of mutually reinforcing lies, and the system depended on the enemy's own intelligence habits. If German analysts expected units to produce radio chatter, then fake chatter helped. If reconnaissance expected to see vehicle parks, then dummy parks helped. If local reports and field observations mattered, then visible soldiers wearing the right signs helped. The Ghost Army played the enemy's own habits back at them. This is the part that can feel almost conspiratorial, though the facts do not need an invented conspiracy. The operation itself involved men planning together in secret to change what another army thought it knew. They produced supporting details, managed leaks, borrowed identities, and built a military picture that held together from a distance and fell apart up close. The front line became a place where a false impression could draw very real artillery. The risks were real. If enemy forces got too close, the illusion could collapse into danger. Rubber tanks do not stop shells. Loudspeakers do not repel infantry. A man wearing the wrong patch is still a man with a vulnerable body. The Ghost Army's courage is easy to miss when people reduce it to clever tricks. They were often near combat, pretending to be stronger than they were, inviting attention without possessing the strength they advertised. That is a strange kind of exposure. Most soldiers try to avoid looking like a target. The Ghost Army's mission could require becoming one. The men had to trust that the deception would hold long enough to matter, and that if it did not, someone would be able to get them out. Behind the humor of inflatable equipment sits a sharp military paradox. The unit's weakness was part of its mission. Its vulnerability made the deception necessary, and the deception made the vulnerability more dangerous. A real armored unit can survive being discovered. A phantom armored unit has to survive being believed. And this is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because that language was real. It just was not describing this particular meteorite. A few months before the Lepage serial began, the French chemist Claude Auguste Cloez published an analysis of an actual meteorite, a real one. The technical passages in the Colorado Martian Dispatch were lifted from Cloez's genuine report and used to describe the Colorado discovery. Now, that is a clue. Whoever wrote this had access to scientific journals, read chemistry papers, and understood that the fastest way to make an extraordinary claim feel credible is to wrap it in real science. But the biggest clue is something else entirely. Look at who published the book. The hardback edition was titled An Inhabitant of the Planet Mars. An Inhabitant of the Planet Mars. It was published in 1865 by J. Hetzel, the same publisher who brought the world the novels of Jules Verne, and it was illustrated by Edouard Rieu, the same illustrator who drew the submarine, the giant squid, Captain Nemo. For 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the same publisher, the same illustrator. The same year that Hetzel was publishing Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, he was also publishing a book about a Martian mummy discovered in the American West. To the French reading public, These books shared shelf space. They shared a visual language. They shared an imprint that was synonymous with scientific adventure. The Colorado Martian came from the house of Jules Verne. So what was it? An elaborate piece of fiction? A journalistic fraud? Or something else entirely?
The house of Jules Verne. The same publisher. The same illustrator. The same year as From the Earth to the Moon. That is not a smoking gun, but it is the kind of detail that makes you lean forward a little. And it brings us to the answer.
The visual crews gave observers something to see. The sound crews gave them something to hear. The radio crews gave German intelligence something to intercept and analyze. Modern armies talk constantly. They send orders, reports, checks, corrections, fragments, repetitions, delays, and routine traffic that only looks boring to outsiders. To a trained signals analyst, that traffic has texture. Units have habits. Operators have rhythms. Networks have structure. A headquarters does not merely announce itself. It behaves like a headquarters over time. The Ghost Army's radio operators had to imitate that behavior. They created fake transmissions and simulated the communications of units larger or different from their own. The work was not just broadcasting random noise. It required procedure, discipline, and a feel for what enemy listeners expected. A real unit might be careless in recognizable ways. A fake unit had to reproduce carelessness without losing control of the deception. That is harder than it sounds. A bad actor overacts. A bad radio deception overtransmits. It tells the listener too much, too neatly, too obviously. The Ghost Army's operators needed to make the radio traffic sound like it came from a working headquarters, while knowing there was no headquarters of that size behind it. The source trail around radio work is a mix of official summaries, public history descriptions, and veteran-centered accounts. The broad fact of fake transmissions is well established. The fine grain of each transmission, each operator's choice, and each enemy interpretation is harder to reconstruct from public summaries alone. That is not unusual for secret military work. The archive gives us the architecture. Memory gives us rooms with people inside them. Between those two, the historian has to move carefully. But even the broad architecture is enough to reveal the strangeness. A phantom division can live on the air before it exists anywhere else. A headquarters can be conjured by call signs and timing. Movement can be implied by the changing pattern of messages. Silence can be used as part of the script. The enemy may never hear the sentence "we are here" and yet still conclude "they are here." Radio is intimate because it feels accidental. A signal intercepted by an enemy does not feel like propaganda. It feels like access. It feels like the other side is slipped. That makes it useful for deception. If you can control what the enemy thinks he has stolen, you can shape what he thinks he knows. The Ghost Army's behavioral work operated in the same spirit. Men could be sent into towns wearing the markings of units they were pretending to represent. They could drive in ways that invited observation. They could let rumors take root. In some retellings, soldiers held conversations where eavesdroppers might hear them, knowing that a whisper carried by the right person could travel farther than an official statement. Again, the point was not to persuade openly. The point was to seed discovery.
I keep thinking about the confidence trick inside that word, discovery. If a message comes to you as an enemy broadcast, you question it. If it comes to you as something you intercepted, something you believe the other side did not want you to hear, your guard drops in a different way. The Ghost Army was playing with that instinct. It was not just building props. It was building the feeling of access.
A rumor discovered by the enemy becomes intelligence. A patch noticed by the enemy becomes a useful detail. A radio net intercepted by the enemy becomes confirmation. The deception works best when the victim participates in assembling it. That participation is what makes the Ghost Army feel larger than its numbers. About 1,100 men could not become a real division. But 1,100 men could create enough artifacts of a division for an intelligence system to process. They could place signs into the channels that turned signs into decisions. The Allies understood that German intelligence did not only ask, "What is physically there?" It asked, "What do the available indicators suggest?" If indicators could be arranged, then the answer could be influenced. This is the quiet unease beneath the colorful story. The Ghost Army did not merely hide troops or equipment. It exploited the bureaucratic machinery by which a battlefield becomes known. A clerk typing a report far from the front might never see a rubber tank. A staff officer moving markers on a map might never hear the sound truck. But those arranged details could flow upward through reports, summaries, and assessments until the map showed a threat where the field held a much smaller force. Clean lines on a military map can conceal a messy chain of human perception. Someone saw something. Someone heard something. Someone believed someone else. Someone wrote it down. Someone trusted the pattern. The Ghost Army lived in that chain. The illustrator who brought Captain Nemo to life, and then he watched them trust it. Figure's condemnation in 1865 was essentially the first fact check. He identified the borrowed language. He connected the story to the tradition of the 1835 Moon Affair. He called it a blow to press credibility. And he was right, but the story did not die there. Stories like this never do. The journalist Pierre Silvestre referenced the Colorado Martian on the front page of the magazine L'Auto in 1919. 55 years after the original publication, it appeared in a 1923 children's story by A. Lorbert titled Un Voyage en Rêve, A Voyage in a Dream. And, most tellingly, it shows up a century later in serious reference works. The 1996 edition of Jerome Clark's The UFO Encyclopedia, a standard reference in ufology, catalogs the case on pages 387 and 1259 to 1260, listed alongside genuine, unexplained phenomena. The story made the jump from literary satire to paranormal evidence. The machine Deparvale built, the machine of format, of style, of borrowed authority, was still running 130 years later.
130 years. From a French newspaper serial to the UFO Encyclopedia. And this, I think, is the real point of the Colorado Martian.
The phrase before D-Day carries a special charge because the invasion of Normandy has become one of the most documented moments in modern military memory. Ships, landing craft, airborne troops, weather forecasts, code names, maps, beaches, and casualty lists fill the public imagination. It is easy to think of D-Day as an event that happened in the open, enormous and impossible to hide. But before the beaches, D-Day was a secret fighting for survival inside a world of guesses. German commanders knew an Allied invasion was coming. They did not know exactly where the decisive blow would fall or how the landings would unfold. The Allied deception effort around the invasion sought to shape that uncertainty. Operation Fortitude and the larger deception network pushed German attention toward possibilities beyond Normandy, especially the idea that the Pas de Calais might be the main target, or that Normandy might be only a preliminary move. The Ghost Army should be placed carefully inside that landscape. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops arrived in Europe in May 1944, shortly before D-Day, and its best-known battlefield deceptions unfolded in the European campaign. It was part of the culture and practice of Allied deception, but it was not identical to the whole strategic fortitude apparatus. The broader pre-invasion illusion involved different tools, different commands, and a scale beyond this 1,100-man unit. That distinction protects the truth without draining the mystery. Because the deeper point is not that one small unit single-handedly won D-Day. It is that the war had reached a point where deception itself became a battlefield. The real invasion depended not only on soldiers crossing water, but on enemy uncertainty. Every hour German forces hesitated, every reserve held back, every mistaken expectation mattered. The Ghost Army belonged to that logic. It was a tactical expression of a strategic idea. If the enemy must make decisions through imperfect information, then information itself can be attacked.
Here is where I think the story gets messy in a useful way. If we flatten it into, the Ghost Army fooled Hitler and saved D-Day, we are doing bad history. But if we shrink it into, they were just a quirky side unit with props, we miss the point too. The real power is somewhere in between. They were a small part of a much larger deception war, and that larger war depended on making intelligent people doubt what was in front of them.
After the landings, the Ghost Army's work continued, through France and beyond. The unit moved with the front, using its mobile deception package to impersonate formations, cover movements, and create false impressions. Public summaries describe more than 20 campaigns. The Ghost Army Legacy Project gives the figure as 25 battlefield deceptions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, and Italy, including the work of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and the 3,133rd Signal Company Special. The number matters, but so does the repetition. Each repetition meant the men had to solve the same problem under different weather, terrain, enemy pressure, and operational need. A deception near a river did not feel like one near a town. A false assembly area did not ask for the same signs as a false headquarters. The road net, the civilian population, the possibility of aerial observation, and the closeness of German patrols all changed the performance. The unit's craft was portable, but it was not automatic. A single deception can be dismissed as a clever episode. 25 suggests a method, a doctrine, a way of thinking about war. The Ghost Army was not a one-night illusion. It was a repeatable way to manufacture the appearance of military presence, and every part had a job. The visual crews built what could be seen. The sound crews supplied what could be heard. The radio crews created traffic to be intercepted. The behavioral crews made sightings and rumors feel accidental. Commanders then aimed the combined illusion at specific operational problems. Need the enemy to think a stronger unit is holding a line? Build the appearance of strength. Need to cover the movement of a real unit elsewhere? Create a false presence where the real one used to be. Need to make a crossing, a concentration, or a defensive posture seem plausible? Give enemy intelligence enough material to finish the wrong picture. This is why the Ghost Army can feel like a conspiracy story, even when told from official sources. Conspiracy stories often revolve around hidden structures that manipulate public perception. Here, the hidden structure was real, but its target was not the public. It was an enemy intelligence system in wartime. The manipulation was not an accident or a rumor. It was the assignment. Yet even real secret operations leave messy records. For decades, the public paper trail was thin because the work remained secret. Veterans carried memories. Families carried fragments. A documentary, books, museums, the Ghost Army Legacy Project, and declassified material later pulled the unit into public view. But the long silence shaped the way the story feels. Anything hidden for 50 years begins to gather an aura. The silence becomes part of the story in people's minds. If it was harmless, why was it secret? That question is seductive, but secrecy in wartime does not automatically mean a dark, hidden truth beyond the operation itself. It can mean methods, doctrine, intelligence sensitivities, embarrassment, bureaucracy, or simple classification inertia. Still, the silence matters emotionally. It meant that men who had done something extraordinary often could not explain it fully. It meant the public memory of World War II developed with a missing layer. The war everyone thought they knew had another layer behind it. In that layer, an army made partly of air could still change the behavior of armies made of flesh.
Figuier, Louis. L'année scientifique et industrielle. Vol. 9. Paris, 1865. B. 36-37. Born. Clemens, Samuel, Mark Twain. Petrified Man. Territorial Enterprise. 4th October, 1862. Ive, Twain, Mark. The Petrified Man. Retrospective account. Sketches New and Old, 1875. 6. Dunning, Brian. The Colorado Martian. Skeptoid. Tone 34, 31st March 2026. 7. Clark, Jerome. The UFO Encyclopedia. 4th edition. Detroit. Apogee Books, 1996. B. 387, 1259, 1260. 8. Cloès, Claude Auguste. Meteorite Analysis Report, cited in Figuier, 1865. 9. Wikipedia. An inhabitant of the planet Mars. Retrieved May 2026. 10. Fader, Kenneth. Rocky Mountain Martian. History, Colorado, 10th October 2025. 11. Chabot, Hugues. Images de la science en action dans quelques récits martiens, 1865-1925. In, le roman des possibles, presse de l'Université de Montréal, 2019.
The turn in the Ghost Army story is not that the unit was fake. We've known that from the beginning. The turn is that fake was never the same as useless. To understand why, we have to let go of the simplest version of military presence. A tank is present in the obvious sense if it is made of metal and can fire. A unit is present if it has men, equipment, supply, command, and the ability to fight. By those standards, a rubber tank is not a tank, and a phantom division is not a division. But intelligence also works with assessments. The world as reconstructed from reports, sightings, and signals. In that world, a false tank can influence a true report. A false report can shape a real decision. A real decision can move real troops. That is where the story turns. The Ghost Army's illusions mattered only if they entered the enemy's decision process. A dummy tank sitting unseen in a field is effort without a witness. A fake radio net nobody intercepts is noise. A planted conversation overheard by no one changes nothing. The operation becomes military action when the details are observed, processed, believed enough, or feared enough to affect behavior. The easy version starts to strain when you look at scale. The Ghost Army was about 1,100 men. That is impressive, but it is not the size of the large formations it sometimes represented. The power of the unit came from leverage. It was designed to make a smaller physical presence produce a larger informational footprint. It did not replace real combat power. It multiplied uncertainty around real combat power. The next problem is attribution. This is where a good story can accidentally become too clean. D-Day already has a mythology of decisive hidden moves. The weather call, the code breakers, the double agents, the dummy armies, the commanders staring at maps and guessing wrong. The Ghost Army belongs near that mythology, but not as a replacement for it. It was one specialized piece of a broad allied habit of deception, and its most defensible power comes from the tactical record rather than from swallowing the whole invasion legend. The Ghost Army did not operate in a vacuum, and it did not own the whole D-Day deception legend. Operation Fortitude and the wider Allied deception apparatus involved many people and methods beyond the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Double agents, false orders of battle, dummy equipment elsewhere, controlled communications, and strategic misdirection all formed part of the larger picture. When modern summaries blur those layers, the Ghost Army can become a convenient symbol for a much bigger system. Symbols are useful, but they can also overclaim. Then there is the public record. Official summaries establish the unit and its methods. Public history projects preserve names, documents, photographs, and veteran accounts. Congressional recognition confirms that the service came to be honored at the highest symbolic level. But specific battlefield effects are often harder to prove, with the crispness a listener might want. Did a particular German commander hold a particular unit because of a particular inflatable tank? Sometimes, sources may offer stronger claims than the surviving public record can carry in detail. That does not make the story false. It means the honest version has to separate documented method from dramatic shorthand. Another complication comes from the way people often remember the operation. Because the tools sound playful, the danger can disappear from the telling. Rubber tanks, sound effects, fake patches, actors in uniform. It can sound like a prank, but the purpose was to influence lethal decisions. If the enemy sent fire toward a phantom position, real men, could be under that fire. If the enemy misallocated forces, real soldiers elsewhere might live or die because of the delay. The Ghost Army's work sat inside the machinery of violence, even when its props looked absurd.
Here is where I keep coming back to the same tension. The Ghost Army was not a magic wand. It did not single-handedly win D-Day, and every big claim needs sourcing. But the operation is still astonishing because it understood something modern and unsettling. People do not act only on what is physically in front of them. They act on the picture their systems deliver.
That may be the most interesting part of the story. The Ghost Army's battlefield was not only a road, a riverbank, a wood line, or a town. It was the gap between observation and belief. The unit placed objects, sounds, signals, and behavior into that gap. German intelligence, if the deception worked, did the rest. The story still feels contemporary because we live with systems that turn fragments into certainty all the time. A photograph, a signal, a clipped sentence, a pattern of movement, a source that seems accidental. The Ghost Army operated in a world of radio intercepts and aerial reconnaissance, but its core insight belongs to every age of information conflict. If you shape enough of the inputs, you may shape the conclusion. The men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were not supernatural tricksters. They were soldiers using the ordinary weaknesses of perception under extraordinary pressure. The mystery is not whether rubber can become steel. It cannot. The mystery is how often human systems treat signs of steel as steel long enough for history to change. And that is a much more unsettling thought than a fake tank. After the war, the Ghost Army mostly vanished into the ordinary silence of veterans coming home. Some men returned to civilian lives as artists, designers, businessmen, workers, husbands, fathers, neighbors. Some carried sketchbooks and memories. Some had served in a unit whose very purpose made it hard to explain without violating the rules that still surrounded it. The public did not immediately build monuments to their work because the public did not really know what their work had been. Imagine being asked at a dinner table what you did in the war and knowing that the honest answer sounded like a joke. I helped make fake tanks. I played recordings of armored columns. I wore another unit's patch so the enemy would notice. Without the classified context, the sentences shrink. They lose the danger, the planning, and the unnerving intelligence logic that made them matter. For more than 50 years, the story remained classified. 1996 is often given as the key declassification moment, the point at which the sealed outline could begin moving into public view. From there, the Ghost Army entered documentaries, books, exhibits, interviews, archives, and the work of people determined to preserve the names behind the illusion. The late recognition matters because it changes the emotional shape of the story. During the war, the Ghost Army's success depended on being misunderstood by the enemy. After the war, its disappearance meant being barely understood by the country it served. That is not the same kind of secrecy, but it has a similar loneliness. A man could have helped build a phantom army in Europe and still find that the most dramatic part of his service had no easy place in public memory. In 2022, members of the Ghost Army were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. A public ceremony followed in 2024 with surviving veterans, families, military leaders, and members of Congress finally gathered around a story that had spent decades in the shadows. The medal did not make the work real. The work was already real. But it gave the country a way to recognize that this kind of deception had been part of the war effort. That idea is worth sitting with.
And that phrase is uncomfortable for a reason. We usually want service to sound clean and direct. Build the bridge. Hold the line. Rescue the wounded. Here, service meant shaping a false picture so the enemy would make worse choices. That does not make it less honorable. It makes it harder to talk about honestly.
This was not deception for profit, vanity, or political spectacle aimed at civilians. It was deception as a wartime craft, used against an enemy army, under command and in support of real operations. And it was carried out by men who often had to stand close to danger while pretending to be something they were not. The public ceremony also brought the story into a safer light. Once a secret operation becomes heritage, it changes texture. The rubber tanks become museum objects. The photographs become teaching tools. The funny parts become easier to enjoy because the killing has stopped. But the original strangeness should not be polished away. A display case can make the deception look tidy. A label can make the mission seem inevitable, as if everyone involved knew exactly how history would judge it. The men in the field did not have that luxury. They worked with bad roads, changing orders, tired bodies, fragile equipment, and the fear that the enemy might test the illusion at the worst possible moment. Imagine one of those tanks deflated. On the ground, it is almost nothing. A skin, a folded shape, a thing without menace. It cannot cross a field under its own power. It cannot protect a crew. It cannot punch through a wall or hold a bridge or roar through a town. It becomes dangerous only when distance, fear, sound, radio, and expectation inflated in the mind of the enemy. That is what the Ghost Army understood. War is physical, but command is interpretive. Soldiers bleed in the real world, but generals decide through maps, reports, symbols, and estimates. Between the blood and the map lies a dangerous translation. The Ghost Army entered that translation and bent it.
What stays with me is not just the cleverness. It is the restraint we have to bring to the story now. The Ghost Army was real. The secrecy was real. The rubber tanks were real objects, even when they represented unreal strength. But the clean legend, the idea that one phantom army won D-Day by itself, is too neat. The stronger version is stranger anyway. A small unit became powerful because modern war could be fooled at the level of paperwork, sound, sight, and expectation.
So the final image is not a fake tank fooling a fool. It is a chain of perception. A soldier inflates a dummy vehicle in a field. Another man checks a radio schedule. A sound crew aims recorded armor into the night. Someone wears a patch he is meant to be seen wearing. Somewhere beyond the line, an observer hears glimpses, guesses, and reports. Farther back, an officer reads the report and adjusts the world inside his head. That world is not fully true, but it is true enough to matter. The Ghost Army did not prove that the world is imaginary. It proves something colder. In war, the route from what exists to what gets decided is fragile. Put the right false markers on that route, and an army that does not exist can cast a real shadow. For 50 years, that shadow remained classified. Then the files opened, the veterans spoke, the exhibits traveled, and the country finally looked back at the men who had been asked to perform one of the strangest duties in World War II. They had gone to Europe not only to fight the enemy, but to make him feel an army where there was not one. And for a little while, on roads and riverbanks and fields where real armies were killing and dying, that strange work mattered.
I'm Tom Mackenzie. This has been Unexplained History. If tonight's story leaves you with one question, let it be this. When history turns on what someone believes they saw, how many ghosts are hiding in the official record?